A Russian general has just said the unthinkable. Russia is losing this war, and it will lead to the collapse of the Russian state. This language is unheard of, especially coming from a highly respected military insider. General Leonid is not some pro-Western general. He in fact hates NATO and hates the West, but he loves Russia. And that's why he's warning Russians that Putin has condemned the country to a strategic defeat. The general's warning is actually validated by Russian military's panic. Putin's chief of staff, Valery Gerasimov, has been caught blatantly lying to Putin about encircling Ukrainian forces. This deceit proves that military is covering up failures to avoid a political purge. And this whole thing starts with competent commanders. And the truth is, Russia is running out of them. This is not coming from me. This is coming from Russians who are talking about how bad the commander situation is. Take a listen.
Есть вот какая проблема.
Here's the issue. Some really terrible things are happening at the front because there's essentially no discipline in the army. We don't have discipline in the country either because we don't have an ideology.
Are there specific units where there's no discipline?
Это уже системно.
It's already a systemic issue, you know? When it happens in some places, it depends on the commanders, but in reality, there aren't enough good commanders. There are too many elements at play. We're recruiting a lot of soldiers and not screening them properly, and we're taking in a huge number of people from prisons. Recently, the military counterintelligence officers told me that in one of the units, our own people were extorting money by holding others in basements and taking all their debit cards. Once again, as soon as an investigation started, everyone suddenly got sent to the front lines. We have the Gyurza story, where our own were killing our own. We have another story. But I'll tell you, in some units of our Russian army, there are these AWOLers. They've been declared AWOL. Their arms are broken, their ribs are broken. I don't know. I'll tell you that in the special unit Akhmat, there are also such guys.
Я не знаю, я уже скажу, что в спецназе Ахмат тоже есть такие ребята.
Russians are starting to abuse Russians, and there's no control over it. When there's no control and oversight, lawlessness sets in. We pretend that this problem doesn't exist, but it really does. We don't discharge soldiers because they have hepatitis or HIV. They continue to fight. For now, it's at the front, but there's a significant danger that it will spread deeper.
Большая опасность, что оно вот пойдет уже вглубь.
This is exactly what General Leonid is pointing out too. Russian soldiers are being mistreated by their own incompetent commanders, and Russian elites that are working out of the Kremlin are ordering as to how to carry out this invasion. Now, to understand why this is such a big deal, let's look at who this guy is. He's one of the most well-respected figures inside the country. He served as a senior aide to the Soviet Union's defense ministry, and on top of that, he was chief minister of general affairs before the Soviet collapse. But even after the collapse, he played an integral part in rebuilding the Russian state. He was one of the most influential people with the Russians' defense ministry in the 90s, and from 96 to 2001, he was the head of the main directorate of international military. Basically, this was the department that was responsible for anything that had to do with the Russian military and a foreign military. Now, they have weird names for their departments, but clearly this was an important position. This experience gave him a unique insight into what Russia was doing wrong when it started this invasion. In fact, in January of 2022, so just 1 month before Putin launched his special military operation, General Leonid publicly predicted why this invasion would be a mistake, and guess what? Almost all his predictions have come true. In 2022, he said that a prolonged war with Ukraine would weaken the Russian economy and aggravate an already looming demographic crisis. He also said that internationally, this war with Ukraine would lose friends for Russia and risk a full-on war with NATO. Well, guess what? He's right on almost all those points. We already know that Putin's 3-day special military operation has turned into something that's a lot longer than 3 days. And Russia's demographic crisis? Well, it's become the most dangerous thing for the Russian state. In fact, Russian birth rates have plunged to 200-year low. This is despite the fact that Putin and the Kremlin are promoting policies that are meant to increase the birth rate. I'm guessing much like everything else Putin does, things are not going according to plan. Even internationally, everything this general predicted has been right. Russia is now looking for friendship in countries like North Korea and Iran. And Russian President Putin cannot even travel to like half the countries in the world. That's why he couldn't go to BRICS summit in South Africa, and that's why he can't even go to a single G20 summit since this whole thing started. If that's not losing friends, I don't know what is. Now, General Leonid predicted all this in January of 2022, before Putin even launched the invasion. And on top of this, with his statement back then, he actually called on Putin to resign, or he called on Russian parliament to forcefully force him out. Now, I'm sure you guys know what happens to any other person who says something like this inside Russia. They usually shoot themselves in the back of their head 8 times. But this guy is still living freely in Russia, and he has continued to criticize Putin's war. This just goes to show how important someone like this is that even Putin cannot touch him. Well, just recently, he dropped his newest bombshell. He called out the mistreatment of Russian soldiers at the hand of Russian commanders. He said, and I quote, "No country can win a war like this." He also accused Putin of having condemned Russia to a strategic defeat. And then he quotes Putin's own words against him. You see, in June of 2024, Putin himself said that a strategic defeat of Russia on the battlefield means the end of the 1,000-year history of the Russian Empire. Well, guess what? General Leonid is now pointing to that statement and saying that Putin is kinda driving Russia towards a strategic defeat, and that means that Russia will collapse. On top of this, he also took some time out to mock Putin's regular nuclear saber rattling, saying that the Kremlin has been touting its latest missiles like Poseidon and Oreshnik, but those missiles cannot protect Russia if there's a war with the United States. Now, I'm quoting this next part basically word for word, so hope you guys realize how crazy this statement is. Quote, "In reality, the US would destroy us before our missiles reach their target, even if we manage to fire them." End quote. Definitely a crazy statement coming from a Russian general. He also talks about Putin's recent claims that Russian forces have surrounded Ukrainian forces in Pokrovsk. He says that even if Russia takes over the city, it's only a minor tactical success. At a strategic level, Russia has suffered every single defeat imaginable. Reading all this, I'm shocked that this guy is still living inside Russia and roaming around freely. But what he's calling out is definitely true. We have seen countless video examples of Russian soldiers being mistreated on the front lines because they refuse to follow a suicidal order or they refuse to do something that the commander wants them to do. Here's just one example.
I am a serviceman of the 25th Combined Arms Army, 67th Division, 36th Regiment, Assault Detachment. For the 3rd day, we are handcuffed to a tree without food, without water, without anything. They don't take us to the toilet. That's how things are.
Same for me. What can I say?
Now, the Kremlin is just as much to blame for this as the incompetent commanders on the front line. That's because the goals that the Kremlin is giving these commanders is to gain ground at any cost. That means these commanders don't care how many casualties they are suffering. They want to focus on just gaining ground. And that's why they keep sending in new recruits, they keep sending in Russian soldiers, waves after waves, into Ukrainian firing lines. Their whole strategy is to hope that the Ukrainian soldiers run out of ammo and then experienced forces can go in and take over the positions. That means even if this works, Russia is losing an unimaginable amount of soldiers. Talking about losing soldiers, let's talk about the Pokrovsk encirclement. You see, roughly 2 weeks ago, Russian Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov told Putin on national television that Russian forces have surrounded the city while Ukrainian forces are still inside. Now, at the time, this was not true and is still not true even to this very day. This is exactly why many Russian war bloggers were extremely mad. They are now angrily denouncing Gerasimov for blatantly lying to Vladimir Putin about military's progress in Ukraine. They noted that the incident highlights the persistent problem of false reporting. A few weeks ago, some observant commentators noticed that the map of the front line seen in the background of the Russian military defense video showed Russian positions kilometers further west than Russians or even Ukrainians open source analysts had independently assessed them to be. Then, the Putin-Gerasimov briefing demonstrated that this was not just for show, but was being reported directly to the Supreme Commander. Gerasimov claimed that the city of Pokrovsk and Miranahard were encircled, with 31 Ukrainian battalions surrounded by Russian forces. By the way, just a side note, one battalion is like 300 to 1,000 soldiers. So this guy is basically claiming that up to 31,000 Ukrainian soldiers were surrounded by Russians, which is just not true, because that's just not how the battles are being fought on the front lines. The Russian guy who's supposed to update Putin on all the progress from the front line doesn't know how the battles are being fought. And on top of that, I don't know if you guys know, Putin famously doesn't use a smartphone. This has been confirmed by like the Kremlin defectors, and on top of that, Kremlin itself has confirmed this. I'm guessing he saw what happened to Hezbollah, so he doesn't want to take any risk. That means all the information that he gets basically comes from people like Gerasimov and people in his inner circle. So they can lie to him about how the frontline situation is and kind of get away with it until like it's literally impossible to do so. But anyways, coming back to Gerasimov's statements, even Russian commentators started rejecting the claim that Russia had surrounded the city. In fact, one war blogger even said, "I wonder if me saying Gerasimov is lying about encircled Ukrainian men, or is Gerasimov discrediting the armed forces by lying?" Now, the reason why this blogger is making this joke is because Russia has been using this law, the discrediting the armed forces law, to basically silence any criticism. If someone says that, hey, Russian army is not being run properly, well, that person goes to the jail because he discredited the armed forces. If someone is just singing a song in middle of St. Petersburg, she goes to jail because she is discrediting the armed forces. But when someone from Kremlin lies about the army, apparently that's not discrediting the army. It's like the famous saying goes, for my friends, everything, and for my enemies, the law. But unfortunately for Gerasimov, it looks like his luck may be running out. According to this Telegram report, he would lose his position if he fails to take over the city. Putin has given him a deadline. Take the city by mid-November, or this order is general's last chance to retain power. This is exactly why we're seeing meat-throwing increase in the sector. Command is launching waves after waves of suicidal attacks to carry out the order at any cost. And in fact, we can see this from battlefield clips that are coming out from that front. Just a few days ago, me and Chuck Farr recently broke down one of the clips, and it shows us exactly how far Russia is willing to go to take over the city. We see Russian soldiers carrying gas grenades, which is a war crime by the way. But unfortunately for this one soldier, it seems he got the taste of his own medicine. Just take a look.
We can't play that.
Yeah, so here is a really interesting clip, and I watched this a lot. So something that these guys have is really combusting, and I went through it again and again. And the first thing I thought was he probably had a couple of mortar rounds in his pack. And there are these like little donuts that are on the bottom of a mortar round by the fin. They're called increments, and they burn really rapidly. Okay, but then I looked at it and I thought, okay, well, maybe he had some high capacity smoke grenades. But I've come to the conclusion that what he likely had in his packs, they were gas grenades. The Russians use CS and CN and chloropictin and a couple other war gases. So as delightful as this is, we're looking at a couple of guys who were bringing the gas grenades up to the front. And the guy who was laying this way, they were in his pack. And when the drone went off, this is what happened. Now this makes perfect sense to me because it just keeps burning.
Going, yeah.
So I think I'm looking at a high capacity tear gas or anti-riot agent going off.
Okay.
It also explains why these guys go into the smoke, but nobody stands up and crawls away. They're getting poisoned. The other thing the brigade surgeon was telling us is he treats gas casualties, and some of these guys die. And you don't necessarily die from tear gas.
So something more. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did a report for the Kyiv Post a couple of weeks ago, and it was my third report on chemical warfare agents being used by the Russians. And at least 2 cases, they've determined that the Ukrainian soldiers who died were exposed to organophosphates, which is the fancy term for insecticide. But organophosphates are also the basis of nerve gas. In fact, nerve gas was discovered by the Germans by chemists who were trying to make insecticide.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So I think what we're looking at here is Russian chemical weapons that, unfortunately, and to our Russian listening guests, I'm sorry these guys got smoked literally with their own chemical warfare things, but I think that's what happened.
Now, this clip is just a small part of what we're doing every single week on Basics Insider. As you guys know, we cannot show you all the battlefield clips here on YouTube because it's against YouTube's guideline. That's why we built our own platform, Basics Insider. Over there, we have no restrictions, so we can provide you guys with uncensored coverage of what's going on in Ukraine and what's going on around the world. We don't have to blur anything that an advertiser doesn't like because we don't run ads on the website. We run the website through support from you guys. So if you're someone who's interested in watching battlefield breakdowns every single week, you should definitely go check out our platform by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on your screen. You can also just go to basicsinsider.com. By joining, you'll be able to watch this whole episode and tons of other content we already have on there. On top of that, you'll be supporting the channel and supporting our coverage. So thank you so much. My name is Sam, and I'll see you guys next week.